Hey everybody, welcome back to the Overwatch Project. This is sort of an impromptu podcast. I just wanted to make a response to Mark Passio's latest video podcast, which was number 227, which is available on his YouTube channel or library or BitChute, wherever you happen to look at his material. As you know, I post a lot of his stuff in regards to natural law and freedom on my webpage or my website, OverwatchProject.com. I do agree with a lot of things that he and other people say, like Larkin Rose, but I also wanted to clarify a few things because his last podcast, he made certain claims of absolute understanding of the psychology of the law enforcement arm of the statist operation, which is really just a gigantic criminal enterprise that is perceived to be legitimate by most people. So, going back to my experience, as Mark Passio makes these claims that, it's not a claim, he asserts his knowledge of the internal operations of satanic orders, which he was a part of and worked inside, as he can tell you the inside thinking of those operations more than I would be able to, because I'm just looking at it as an outsider, and I can study it, but I wouldn't know exactly what it's like to be in there. I was inside government, so I worked and was brainwashed into thinking that government and authority was a legitimate thing for most of my life, until I realized certain things that had been bothering me from the beginning. I'll give you an example. In my training, when I was learning to work within law enforcement, I remember reading, we were reading laws in New Jersey. We have very comprehensive statist gobbledygook laws, but robbery was kind of always straightforward. It was basically theft with force or the threat of force. And a lot of people want to say taxation is theft, but it's not actually theft, it's actually robbery. And I even realized that when back in 1991, when I was reading the statute, I remember thinking to myself, wow, if you change the word robbery and just make it a tax, that's the same thing. Now, I have always had this inner voice that was always trying to, liberate my mind from my brainwashing, but I didn't always have the access to the information I needed to actually do that completely until about 2012. And that was because, brainwashing causes a lot of filtering of information. You are operating constantly with a cognitive dissonance, and even though there might be a little moral compass in there trying to steer you in the right direction, you're in a fog. You're in a fog of thinking. Things that don't make any real sense, you think make sense. So it's really screwed up thinking. Now, Passio is very angry. I don't always agree with that. That's his style. That's his thing that he does. I just want to say that I also agree with him in his when he describes the interference theory of humanity. And it's because of that I have a little bit more patience. I kind of sound more calm and unemotional when I'm explaining some of this stuff. Because if you take a look at the human being, I suppose I should backtrack just a little bit. I'm not a materialist. I'm very spiritual. I'm not religious at all. I see statism, materialism, all these religions that have dogmas and doctrines that contradict the totality of information that's available about reality. I see them all as garbage in for the brain, and then you have garbage out. And I don't want to get into too much detail about that, but my phone, I have to silence that so it doesn't do that again. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So, when Passio has this episode 227, where he talks about the psychology of police, he's correct in those two types that he talks about. They're clearly there. But however, that wasn't me, and I know other people that didn't fit into those two types exactly. There's a third type that he's simply not aware of. That third type is a very moral person that has been brainwashed into confusing morality with statist indoctrination and their laws. Okay? And while I was always in great conflict, I was never a good order follower. I always debated what I thought were stupid things. I was very passive aggressive, and other people I knew that worked inside law enforcement that were like that. They were passive aggressive, meaning they figured out ways to sort of subvert stupid orders without being insubordinate. You get very creative when you're in that kind of environment, and if you're actually, trying to be a good person, but you don't understand that government itself is an actual illusion, that authority of this magnitude is just an illusion, that the only reason it actually exists is because people have believed it exists. Government is possibly the largest human-created thought form that has corrupted human beings and human society more than anything else. It is truly evil, and it is promoted by religions. It's in the Bible. It's promoted by the garbage book of the Bible. It's promoted by materialist atheists that want the state to be the ultimate God. It is the true goal of some of these rioters and looters, which annoyingly keep getting referred to as anarchists by the news media when they are not anarchists. They are actually full-blown tyrannical statists trying to topple the United States, which isn't tyrannical enough for them. And when they get done with what they're doing, as has happened before throughout history, these people that are doing the riots now are the first ones that have to be killed off by the new, bigger statist regime that will take over. This is obvious. It's happened throughout history. It doesn't take rocket science to figure this out. But people are brainwashed at different levels. And yeah, it does make me angry, really, really angry when I broke myself free and there's people I know that I could never reach, that they're so incredibly brainwashed and they lack any spark of thinking inside them. It infuriates me to no end. But also, okay, going back to that interference theory. So something designed the universe, you can call it the ultimate God or the ultimate creator or designer of the universe. And in that design, there is very specific rules for this physical plane, rules that include rules of behavior that you can call what, like Mark Passio calls natural law, that governs actually the correct rights of right and wrong behavior and good and bad. So you can objectively, as a sentient being, determine good or evil. And this level of sentience is what determines exactly what is good or evil based on your ability to process information. So humans are separate from all other life on Earth because I believe that we were interfered with. And Passio's talked about this before, and other people have talked about it. Ancient Aliens is sort of like a controlled version of that information, but it's some of that stuff on there is kind of garbage. But if you look at the Sumerian text, if you look at Humans Are Not From Earth book by Dr. Ellis, a big volume book which explains all the problems with human design and how we were clearly made, possibly partly from Earth life here and partly from something else. So the Bible, which is a plagiarized book of many more ancient texts, When it says humans are made in the image of their creator, or in the Bible it's trying to be the Yahweh monster, if that is probably based on a original truth. We were engineered and tampered with, but for what reason? If you look at the Sumerian text, it's quite clear. We were engineered to be sort of like slave labor. That is in the original Sumerian tablets. So that is probably one of the older records that we have, the oldest known records that we have access to. And those mythologies are probably based on an earlier truth. So if you are designing a being to be a slave, you're going to tamper with the way it thinks. If you look at the story in the Bible about the story of the Tower of Babel, it's a clear depiction that humans are messed with so that we can't get along, so that we are more easily confused. And maybe there's some truth in there also, because in that story, humans aren't even doing anything wrong. They're just capable of doing anything they can imagine they can do. And that can't be, because the Yahweh monster felt threatened by that, so he had to come down and confuse our language and spread us all over the world, according to that tale. Now, what I'm saying is that I have a little bit more patience because I see people as that are that brainwashed and can't be reached as really being broken. The human, whatever it is, design is sort of by default set so that you can be easily brainwashed, and the garbage starts coming into the human being from when you're born to when you're 6 years old. It's all hypnotic programming, and then after that, all the other brainwashing that accumulates. And let me tell you something about myself. If you look at it, all entertainment is statist propaganda, right? And when I grew up, I went to Catholic school, as you well know, so statist propaganda, religious brainwashing, statist brainwashing, even in one of my childhood favorite science fiction shows when I was growing up was Star Trek. But looking back at it now, and taking a look at what Star Trek was really about, Star Trek, the original series, had some really interesting esoteric information that was embedded in the stories. It wasn't garbage science fiction. Back then, that was really good science fiction. Some of the crap they're producing today is total garbage. But a lot of very, very interesting things in the original Star Trek series. But also, Star Trek is a gigantic brainwashing and propaganda tool for statism. The whole show is based around the Federation. And if you think about the ridiculousness of this whole thing, it's like this utopian galactic government that, everybody's just internally in the Federation, everybody gets along fantastic. And they have all these regulations that Spock always remembers with his Vulcan brain, all these nuanced regulations that regulate everything. They make you think. I had to pause there for a second. My dog started barking. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so the Federation is this utopian statist world that they portray in Star Trek. So keep in mind, a lot of the things I saw in Star Trek, the original series, it makes you. It did affect me. It's statist brainwashing. That you can have like this freedom within a gigantic regulated government body. So, and it just wasn't that. It was just a whole bunch of other stuff. So all brainwashing, all in there, all in my head. And still I have a moral compass that was making me question things, even as a young person, even as early as, like I said, 1991, when I learned about taxation. Well, when I was reading the robbery statute in law class, and I remember thinking, robbery is exactly, you could say that if you just replace that word with tax, it's the same exact definition. Because any infraction, Passio is correct, any infraction with government, even a minor one, could lead to your death if things escalate enough. So all that is true. And inside the police agencies, there are those two dynamics that he describes. There absolutely are. There are psychopaths in there, people that are power hungry, people that are kind of, they are cowardly. They're there just for the health insurance and for the retirement benefits. It's clear that is the case. However, there's a third kind, and that is a kind of person that is actually moral, that is actually deluded themselves into thinking that the way that you can help people, the way that you can do good in the world, protect people from bad people that want to do them harm, is to get into that kind of work. And until you figure that something like the entire government operation, the entire apparatus of government is a complete and total slavery and robbery operation, until you free your mind of that, and which happened to me, like I said, around 2012, I started to realize that completely, and I had access to information at that time that helped me realize that. Some of this stuff came when I started reading about, natural law. It's mentioned in the Constitution. Natural law is mentioned there. However, America, the way I see it, was an experiment to try to contain government. I mean, actually, that's not how I see it. Actually, that's exactly what it was. Constitution is there to try to restrain government. It's failed miserably. You cannot contain a cancer. There is no such thing as a cancer that is necessary. And there's no such thing as a government that is necessary. And there's no such thing as living without rules either, because there's natural law that governs rules. But I just had to point out that there are this third type of brainwashed cop out there that will do things like turn in cops if they find out that they are doing something illegal or unallowed, things that are not allowed. I was shocked when I saw the Floyd video because to me, people have these conspiracy theories about, this was a setup, to... And in some ways it was, but not the way people think. The way I see it is they simply have, after 9/11, slowly, incrementally, as they train new cops, more and more militarize them. To train someone to restrain them by their neck is stupid, and you're just creating the environment where something like that was going to eventually happen, because whatever it is, 70-80% of cops will just follow their training and orders without thinking, and they will eventually, if you create the right circumstances, kill someone when you train them to do things that could likely lead to someone's death. So they didn't have to set up a actual, orchestrate a false flag with the officer there who's not real, and George Floyd, and some people think he's still alive. None of that had to happen. All they have to do is create the circumstances for the right type of person to eventually be killed, and then that can then be the excuse for the media to then launch into the call to the riots and the looting and the well-funded, orchestrated super statist operation to do that. So that's what probably really happened there. And the whole thing with Passio's podcasting is I just, because I post a lot of his material on my site that I agree with and is necessary for people to understand, especially the natural law seminar and his upcoming natural law documentary. But I just, there sometimes he'll say things and it's like, I was an insider. He wants to say that, he does say that you can't question his knowledge of the internal operations of the satanic order that he was inside of before he got out of it. Because he was an insider, he knows exactly what it was about. Well, I was inside government, and I know exactly what it was about, and I learned it the hard way. And I was truly naive, misinformed, brainwashed, and operating under a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance for many, many years. And I feel bad about that, but at the same time, I know it wasn't really if you're brainwashed from birth and you're trying to get out of it. I know a lot of the people struggle internally with their internal moral, whatever that little inner voice is that keeps pulling you in the right direction while you keep going in the wrong direction, which was me for many, many years. You are not, these people are not psychopaths, and they're not cowards. And they're eventually, several of them do break free, and they make podcasts like this to instruct other people about the reality of things. So I just want to say that, I don't know if anybody will ever, if Mark Passio will ever hear this or anything, but, his teachings did affect me in a great way, especially natural law. That kind of put everything into perspective. Because once I understood that, everything else fell into place. Human behavior then all totally made sense to me. And this is very objective. It doesn't require you to make shit up. Before I shut off this podcast, I wanted to say that I do have some exclusive videos that you can only see on Library and BitChute. They will not be on Spreaker here or on my YouTube channel. There is one that I think everybody should watch. It's pretty recent. It's Freedom Explained with Knives, which should be pretty interesting. It's not that long. And it is a video. So you should go check that out on BitChute or Library. Everything is accessible from OverwatchProject.com. So go to OverwatchProject.com and you'll see the links to Library and BitChute on the navigation bar. And that's it for this video. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.